In this video, we're going to check out the game played in round 12 of the FIDE Candidates in Toronto. It is Fabiano Caruana against Vidit. And Fabiano is having a tough tournament, but still, he is hanging in there just a bit behind the leaders. And he's trying to catch up with them. So he's in a sort of must-win situation, and I think he is facing Vidit now at the right moment. Because the Indian player, he is playing a very enterprising chess. But in the previous game, in the previous round, round 11, he played against Jan Nepomniachtchi and he had a heartbreaking loss there. He had winning chances there. If he would have won the game, things would have been quite nice for him still. But he lost, and so pretty much he is out of contention for first place. So big opportunity for Fabiano Caruana to try to play for a win. But let's see if that's going to work out well this time. So he's playing with the white pieces. I'm going to show you the game. You only have to hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate all your efforts doing that. And I will show you what happened now. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop C4, bishop C5, the Italian opening. Not a big surprise. Castling kingside, knight F6, D3, D6. White goes for the move C3, pretty standard opening play by both sides. And I'm not sure if they had specifically prepared this variation for this game, but pretty sure they had looked at it at some point, probably in the preparations for the tournament. Knight BD2, castling kingside, H3, and here a thematical way of playing for black is moving that knight around from C6 to the other side of the board. Knight E7, rook E1, knight G6. I think this is basically the first interesting moment of the game. This position has still been reached in hundreds of games, and Fabiano Caruana has also quite a bit of experience with even this exact position. I mean, he knows this Italian opening inside out. He's the greatest opening theoretician out there, and he knows all these subtleties. And in previous games against Nakamura in Norway Chess 2018, and even also against Wesley So in the Sinkfield Cup, he played a move knight f1. This is the most standard way of playing to get a knight around to g3, and then probably when the knight is there supporting the pawn on e4, at some point you're trying to play the move d4. But black is rock solid, and it's difficult to prove any advantage here. But there's always space for new ideas. And here Fabiano goes for the move a5. It's an almost novelty. I think it has never been played at very high level, and it's not really clear what this pawn is going to accomplish, but maybe later on, when we are talking about late middle games or even in end games, fixing the pawns on the queen side may become quite useful for white. But that's really far away, and we are not sure how that's going to work out in this game. Black played the move c6, so it's clear that at some point black is trying to strike in the center with the move d5. So white is trying to get in d4 at the right moment. Well, realizing what black is contemplating here, white voluntarily drops back with the bishop to b3, a typical routine in these sort of positions. Rook e8, so the rook is also going to support the action in the center. And look now, white played the move d4, and what does black play? Just answering with d5. So we have full action on the board. Massive tension in the center. And one of the key ideas behind this pawn break by black is that if you take on d5 rather than taking back, because the pawn on e5 will be hanging now a couple of times, it is very important for black to start here with the move e4, attacking the knight on f3. Once the knight is going away, you do take back on d5, and life is great for black. So rather than taking on d5, white first captures on e5, attacking the knight on f6. But now there follows massive exchange of pieces. Knight takes e5, knight takes, rook takes, and now the captures on e5 are over, but there's another capture on d5, attacking the rook. So black first takes on e1, queen takes e1, knight takes d5. And what should we think about this position, guys? Well, position is very, very even. No real weaknesses here on the board. And well, white went here for the move bishop c2. So just going to continue playing in a slow way. And probably if you see this position or you had followed the game live, you would expect, well, not much is going to happen. Well, stay tuned. Give me a few more minutes and we will get there. Bishop e6, getting the bishop out, supporting the knight, but most importantly, trying to get the rook into the game. White played knight f3. The knight is much better placed there. Sometimes knight g5 is an idea to hit the pawn on h7. Also, the bishop may even come to dead square. So black played here the move queen d7. And the idea is that at some point you can just try to play the move bishop f5, trying to neutralize that pressure by trading off white's best piece, the bishop on c2. But I think Fabiano played very interestingly now. He played here this move c4, attacking the knight on d5. And the black knight got to make a concession. Where is it going now? Well, probably, and this is very complicated, the best square for the knight is f6. Was not played in the game. But I was trying to analyze, why did Vidit not play this move? Probably he didn't like bishop g5 when white is about to ruin the kingside formation by doubling the pawns. And then later, if the knight is no longer there, the queen can come in with threats against the pawn on h7, or the rook can come to d1. However, if black is playing very precisely, bishop takes h3 is a fantastic shot. I mean, this was all not played. One idea is that if you do take, it's queen takes, and there are all sorts of ideas, including queen g3 check, as the pawn on f2 is pinned. Even knight g4 is an idea, and apparently black is doing fine here. Trust me, I mean, it's very complicated, and it's probably something Vidit didn't really see or didn't believe it could be working, and he instead played the move knight e7, which is also possible, but it's definitely more passive. I believe the knight is better placed on f6, guarding the king side. Now, white played the move bishop e3, getting the bishop into the game, but not for long, because the bishops are going to be exchanged on e3. And now the white queen is going to be a bit more centralized. And obviously, if you take the pawn on c4, well, there is queen e4 as an idea here, with an attack on the bishop and the pawn on h7. So things are looking very nice. The pawn on c4 is not taken. Black played rook d8, but now white goes for queen c5, defending the pawn. And you can see that black is struggling to find nice squares for all its pieces. And also the bishop on e6, it's standing there, but it's basically restricted by the pawn on c4. But also the other pawns are placed on the same color. So later on, for bishop endgames, things are not looking too bright for black. Another funny idea I wanted to show you is that the move I looked at here is queen d6, offering the exchange of queens. But then it's rook to d1. Brilliant idea, as the queen cannot take on c5. It's rook d8 with back rank mate, which means that after rook d1, okay, black still gotta move the queen, but then you're wasting a tempo. So that doesn't make sense. White can continue further strengthening its position. After queen c5, black played the move h6. But now you also see that the knight is no longer really coming to g6. There's always bishop takes g6, f takes g6, and then black's king side becomes more vulnerable. The bishop no longer will be supported. So I think the last chance here for black to do something is something like knight g6. And the knight is temporarily blocking that diagonal for the bishop. Otherwise, the knight can even come back to f8. And I know it's passively placed there, but it does guard a lot of potential weaknesses. So that's probably the move which should have been played. After h6, the torture is going to start, because white's playing b3, supporting the pawn on c4. And, well, still, queen d6 will be met by rook d1. It's going to be same sort of mate, as the bishop covers the h7 square. The king can't go there. So queen d6, not a good move. Queen c7 was played instead. Now the rook is coming to e1. That's making quite a lot of sense. Nice active square for the rook. And look at this rook. It is unable to make use of any of these squares. All the squares on the d-file are covered by white's pieces. Black played king f8 to support the knight. And how is white going to squeeze something out of this position? That's a very good question. I like move like knight d4 to attack this bishop on e6 does make a lot of sense. Also, rook e3 is a nice way of improving the rook a bit. It's still on the e file, but at some point it may consider a rook lift on the third rank, maybe coming to f3, depending on what is going to happen. Black played here the move king e8, so the king is even coming closer to the center, probably fearing a potential kingside attack. And now, queen h5. What's the queen doing there? Well, very simple, pinning the pawn on f7. So, rook takes e6 is a huge threat. The pawn is not allowed to recapture on e6. So, king goes back to f8. Black is just going to sit and wait, waiting for white to to do something very, very soon. Queen c5, moves are repeated here. Queen c5 back, king e8. And white is not risking anything here. But how is he going to improve its position? I thought the next move is very interesting, g4. You're thinking, what on earth is white's plan? Well, after queen f4, which looks like a nice square for the queen, cannot be attacked by the pawn any longer, but the king comes to g2. And this is also a small improvement, so that the king is no longer on the back rank. You're defending your knight as well. And black played here rook d7. White goes rook e4, chasing the queen back. The queen went back to d6. Now, if queens are coming off the board, things will become easier for black. More scope for maneuvering, but the queen goes back to e3. So white does keep some pressure along the e-file. And here I was wondering actually if black is going to make another waiting move. What is white going to do? And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what's the plan. But it could be that with something like h4, you're trying to open up a second front. Maybe g5 with the idea of taking either with a pawn so that you can create a rook lift, trying to get in via the h-file. Or maybe the knight can take back on g5 to add more pressure to the bishop on e6. These ideas are very interesting. And I think that Vidit was not really fancying to withstand the torture any longer. So he played here the move c5. And I guess the idea is first of all to fix pawns on light squares, but maybe at some point get the knight to c6. But there is this move, rook to e5, attacking the pawn for the second time. And if you do defend it here with rook c7, well, g5 is a great shot. If you take it, knight takes g5, tremendous pressure. This bishop is in trouble and white is making significant progress. Therefore, instead of protecting the pawn, here they followed the move knight to c6, attacking the rook on e5 as well as the pawn on a5. But rather than taking on c5, which is okay, but after rook e7, there are all sorts of counter-attacking ideas against the queen. Black is about to take on g4 with a discovered attack on the queen. The queen also got to keep the rook defended, so things are looking a bit awkward here for white. And the move played by Fabi is way better, much stronger. He went for rook d5, very nice intermediate move. The bishop cannot take the rook because of the pin along the e-file. If you play queen e7, only now you do take on c5, with a big difference that the rook is no longer able to set up threats against the white queen. Therefore, black went back with the queen to c7, but now it's rook takes c5 and white has just won a very healthy pawn. The pawn on a5 is defended, the knight cannot capture it because the queen is hanging on c7. Black played instead rook to e7, and now the queen goes away to c3, defending the pawn but also hitting the pawn on g7. Black may do something about it, but instead went for the move queen d6, setting up a threat against the rook. And what should white do? The rook doesn't have that many squares to go to. Well, b4 is a very nice move, just further strengthening your position on the queen side and trying to push black backwards. Maybe the bishop can come to e4 or maybe even a4. I think black is gonna suffer a lot here. But instead, rook h5 was played. But what is the rook doing there? Black just played the move f6. Now the pawn on g7 cannot be taken. And this rook doesn't have any squares to go to. And probably black is just about to attack the rook with the bishop. Then the rook got a move somewhere. And then the bishop may attack the rook once again. This rook doesn't look great at all. Bishop g6 therefore played, giving a check. And well, the king got to choose. maybe it can go to f8, but it went instead to d8. So black had his plan of placing the king on the queen side. Queen to e3. So the queen is trying to get some access to this queen side. King c8 played. Now the queen comes to b6. And here we are on move 40, this critical, infamous move 40, the last move before the time control. And that's the moment where people often do make mistakes. Well, probably some move like queen f4 is very interesting with ideas. For instance, if you go rook c5 to sacrifice on g4, and if you go h takes, there's queen takes g4 with check hitting the bishop. Things are far from clear in that case. And instead, after rook c5, bishop takes g4, you don't have to take. But if you take on c6 to open up the queen side, probably there's nothing more than a perpetual. So that is something black may have considered. But Vidit, playing it safe on move 40, he did it also against Jan Nepomniachtchi yesterday. He had this fascinating game. He had opportunities to play actively, but instead he played passively with king b8. But now the rook comes back to c5 with great impact, because if the queen is going to move somewhere, there's always rook takes c6 as an idea when the b pawn is pinned and not allowed to take back on c6. So bishop d7 is played in the game, but now b4. So the pawn is coming up to b5 to hit the knight, and the knight can't go away because the queen on d6 is unprotected. Still, something like queen c7 is a possibility. Trying to go for the exchange of queens, not clear at all. But queen f4 was played here. And guys, this is a super important moment, which has a big impact on the outcome of this event. What can white do? Should you be afraid of actions against the pawn on g4? No, you can play b5, but it was not played by Fabi. Why didn't he play this move b5? He's attacking the knight and trying to open up the queen side. If you do take on g4 with the threat of taking on f3, if you take on h4, then black is probably having a perpetual. There's no way to make progress here. But the move overlooked here by Fabiano Caruana is this insane idea, not easy to see. When you see bishop takes g4, you think, oh no, I don't want to give up that pawn. The position gets opened. But knight g1 is a beautiful defensive idea. The knight is a fantastic defender. Everything is covered. There are no good checks. The knight covers the h3 square, and whatever happens, very soon you're going to break through on the queen side. You're attacking the knight. If knight e5, for instance, it's queen d8 check. And if you go to a7, it's b6 with checkmate. So b5 is the killer move. Was not played in the game, but instead bishop f5 was played here. Now it's Fabi's turn to play it safe. He had this opportunity to ignore the threat of bishop takes g4, but he didn't calculate it properly. Bishop takes f5, rook takes f5. Attacking the queen. Fabi is playing for a trick. If queen takes c4, the rook comes back to c5 to hit the queen and the knight. If you play queen e4, well, then it's rook takes c6. Devastating tactical shot, eliminating the key defender. If queen takes, it's queen d8 with a double attack. You're winning the rook, and white emerges with an extra piece. And I should also mention that after rook c5, the pawn on b4, offering the exchange of queens, doesn't really help black here at all. It's rook takes c6, eliminating the defender of the queen, so you're threatening to take it. If queen takes b6, rook takes b6, you're still a piece up and white will win the game. But much better is the move played in the game, queen c7. If you do exchange queens, okay, you're pawn up, but not easy at all. Also, the pawn on b4 will eventually be hanging. So white does keep queens on the board. Queen c5, that is a good move. There are so many possibilities here. Hard to say what black should do. Probably a waiting move, rook e8, rook d7. White will have to prove that its extra pawn is going to be worth something. But it's far from simple. I don't dare to say if it's going to be sufficient for victory in this game. Rook e4 played in the game. Looking for counterplay, but the queen comes in to d5, hitting the rook. And now, all of a sudden, you also got to reckon with other ideas. Rook e2 was played, looking for counterplay. But it's b5, attacking the knight. Great idea. And, well, now the queen side will be opened. Even if you lose the pawn on a5, that doesn't matter, because it's all about king safety. The queen and rook, they will find their way into that position. So this looks very nice. Knight takes a5 was played, but now it's knight to d4, attacking the rook on e2. And there are still a lot of other threats as well, including a move like b6 to set up a discovered attack on the queen. And the 5th rank can be cleared when the knight is hanging. Taking on a6 is another idea. So things are looking very nice. White's pieces are now much better coordinated. If you go back to e5, you can even take on e5. And taking with the queen will be met once again by queen d8 check, king a7, b6 with checkmate. Beautiful mating pattern. If you instead take with a pawn to attack the knight, it's knight e6 to attack the queen. If queen goes to e7, you can even take another pawn because the queen got to retain control over the d8 square. Once again, if you take it, queen d8 followed by b6 with checkmate. Anyway, rook b2 was played in the game, but white played it very simple here by taking the pawn on a6, opening up the queen side, attacking the knight on a5. If the knight captures on c4, which was not played in the game, it's queen g8 check. If king a7, it is knight to b5. With another check, if you think that you have a counter trick, with rook takes, queen c6, double attack, then white is just in time here to drop back with the queen to d5, neutralize the check, and defend the rook. That is winning. And also, after anything else, let's say after queen g8, if you play queen c8, you can play a7 with check, deflecting the king. After king takes c8, it is just an extra queen for white. So white, instead of playing knight takes c4 by black, white got to face here this move, knight c6, offering the exchange of knights, but queen g8 is played anyway. King a7 is knight b5, winning a lot of material. So black went for the move knight e8, but here black's position is falling apart. Rook comes to d5, hitting the knight, which is pinned. And look at this king. This king is safe all the time, no counterplay. If you go king c8, there are various moves you can take, you can advance, you can also play knight e6, winning some material. That should be just game over. So instead, black played king a7, but that's the same as resignation because there's rook takes d8, white is a piece up, and the mating attack continues. So this is a very much needed victory for Fabiano Caruana, who now is just on 7 out of 12. He's on +2, but the tournament leaders, there are on 7.5, so he's half a point behind. And one thing is for sure, the winner of this candidates will be one of these 4 guys. It's either Fabiano Caruana or one of the tournament leaders, Hikaru Nakamura, Gukesh, or Jan Nepomniachtchi. Let's see what is going to happen in the last 2 rounds played on Saturday and Sunday. Stay tuned. All the action is going to be covered on the Robert Riss Chess channel. And just make me a favor. Just one little click or just give it a like. Just think about it, how you would like to help me. Any suggestion is welcome. I will see you very soon again. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.